So I'm excited to actually introduce our featured panel now on what's up with hormones and diabetes data, which will address hormone mapping, how we can track and attribute glucose rises to hormones, and calculating for the monthly cycle, and how this information can be of use for AID systems. So our discussion today will be led by Katarina Brauna, and she will be joined by expert panelists Julia Mader and Dawn Adams. And I would like to bring them up now so they can quickly introduce themselves before diving in.
I'm Dawn Adams. I live in Northern Ireland and I've been asking a lot of difficult questions because nobody has the answers to them about type 1 diabetes in particular and menstrual events, pregnancy and menopause. And increasingly now that has extended to include type 2 diabetes, women who've had experiences of gestational diabetes and LADA and MODI. So that's basically me in a nutshell.
Very good. Yeah, hi. So I'm Julia Mader from Medical University of Graz in Austria. I'm working a lot with diabetes technology, and also here we do see a lot of adjustments that are needed to insulin therapy in those who are both using pen-based therapies or pumps. AID has given us some help here, but of course, also then we might see differences throughout the menstrual cycle. And so I'm quite happy that we take on this quite important topic for this first session of the hackathon.
Hi both, I hope you can hear me. Everything went well in the test, but now my connection is really bad. But I see a lot of thumbs up, that's great. Thanks for being here today. I am your host for the panel, and my name is Katarina. I am a pediatrician and a diabetologist by training, and a digital health researcher with a specific focus on equitable diabetes technology. And a few years back, I co-founded the Open Project, which generated clinical and psychosocial evidence on open source AID use. And we also published an international consensus statement for healthcare professionals that gave them guidance on the topic. And I've recently started a new role as a professor of digital health and non-communicable diseases at the Hasso-Plattner Institute in Potsdam, Germany. And I'm still working on AID systems as a diabetes researcher, but now I am backed up by an entire digital engineering school, which is very exciting. I am also source AID for many years. I am currently a Trio user, and I'm also a mom of a wonderful daughter. I've recently navigated the entire pregnancy and postpartum chaos, both in life and hormonally. And open source AID has been a great resource of support in that. And today's panel explores hormones and diabetes data, how hormonal fluctuations impact glucose management, how we can advance AID systems to make them smarter, but also more equitable for people with different physiologies. And yeah, I have the pleasure to be joined by two exceptional leaders in diabetes research and advocacy, Julia and Dawn, and you've heard a little bit about their background already. So let's start with what we already know. We are aware of significant changes and differences in both clinical and psychosocial outcomes by both biological sex and gender. And we know from evidence before that women tend to experience greater glycemic variability, higher risk of complications, and also more diabetes distress, as well as impacted quality of life and sleep. And in the Open Project, we also found that women using open source AID carry a higher mental load for diabetes care, even with automated delivery. We saw that they often perform workarounds to make AID systems work across the menstrual cycle, like entering fake cards or temporary overrides. And my question to Julia as a researcher is, you've published studies about glucose variability across the menstrual cycle. So if you could share some of your key findings and what still puzzles you about hormones and glucose, that would be great. And
Yeah.
before you start, just a disclaimer to the audience, you can ask questions anytime. We will check the question and answering session regularly. And I will pass your questions on to the two of them. So Julia, take it away, please.
Sure. Thanks for already paving the path into the topic. And yeah, so what we see both in research and in daily practice, that there are relevant changes throughout the hormonal cycle, and it's still way under researched. So there is some data around where we see that there are differences throughout the cycle, and that women struggle more to achieve their targets. Sometimes for them, it's even not that well explained what happens when. So we are currently, for example, in a project together with the Medical University of Vienna, where we collect the data from women who are and who are not using oral entry contraceptives to see how that is affecting and influencing glycemic control. And already in the first preliminary analysis of a group of 10 women, we saw that also in women on contraceptives, they are having difficulties to achieve their glycemic control in 3 kind of cycle periods. So that's also quite impressive in my opinion. And I think there is way more to understand and to learn, and I hope from that project where we also collect data on hormones in parallel to the glycemic excursions and the insulin doses, we will learn more and see hopefully more throughout the next year in terms of publications.
And in terms of cycle phases, did you find any specific time of the month where technology would perform better or worse?
So if I remember correctly, but that was a quite small group, as said before, that they struggle more in the luteal phase than the follicular phase. But yeah, so it's only 10 people that we had a look in our research. I've seen here a comment from Jaime who said there was a poster also at DTM from Nerea, who saw that also increased needs of insulin in mid-cycle were observed in their population.
Thanks for sharing that. My next question goes to Dawn. And Dawn, as a diabetes advocate, you had many conversations with women, but also with non-binary folks around menstruation, perimenopause, and menopause. Were there any themes and frustrations that you saw coming up again and again? And are people feeling better supported now than maybe 5 years ago? What is your take?
I think the peer support is a massive tool that is quite often overlooked, particularly in the research world. But the peer support can only go so far. With regards to the conversations, I admin for an international WhatsApp group of people experiencing menopause. And within that, we have natural menopause, we have surgical menopause, we have people with primary ovarian insufficiency, and we have people who've gone down the route of chemical menopause because they're transitioning. And within that group, those same conversations keep coming up again and again and again. And it doesn't matter where in the world people live, it doesn't matter which continent they live in, it doesn't matter what their healthcare access is. They all feel incredibly frustrated by that variability, particularly, as Julia has already pointed out, with regards to the follicular phase and the luteal phase. And we know that luteinizing hormone and the progesterone in particular have a massive effect on the effectiveness of insulin throughout a 4-week cycle or a 5-week cycle or whatever is normal for those people. And whenever we're having the conversations, we're trying to find ways of helping to support in terms of the technology, in terms of access to the insulin, which is great if you live in a society where you have access to tech. It's great if you have access to faster acting insulins. But if you're in a country where that is priced out of your reach, or the makers of diabetes technologies aren't actually based in those countries or providing the resources that those of us live in higher income countries have access to, then the alternative at this point seems to be looking at different plant-based foods with higher levels of phytoestrogens, particularly in the menopause phase of life, and trying to use those as a supplementation in and of itself. So we're all about trying to add in rather than taking anything away, because quite often we have people who try to remove things from their diabetes life to make things smoother for them. But what we're finding as a global population is it's the adding in that's making the difference, be that fiber, be that phytoestrogen rich foods, be that a technology format or a fast acting insulin. And that again is regardless of what type of menstruation issues you're facing, what types of menopause issues you're facing.
Thank you for sharing. And we have more people on the chat reporting that they've done research on the topic, but also stating that perimenopause, menopause is a very under-researched topic. And I think all three of us would agree. Is there any published research that you already know of on the topic?
So I've been involved in some research with members of the menopause mithers community. We had a poster at ATTD last year in Amsterdam, or earlier this year, sorry, in Amsterdam. And I was involved in the writing of a paper with Diabetes Centre Bern, which looked at some of those issues. There's also a paper which Rita Ford, who works in women's health, had put forward. And that was from a discussion that we had with Diabetes UK. And in fact, from that discussion kind of fed into and was a result of work that the James Lind Alliance, who set research priorities within type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, gestational diabetes, and so on, have seen a development of research within that area. And I'm currently working as part of a research team through Ulster University to capture the unique experiences of women with type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and no diabetes, because you need a control group in the midst of this as well. And the thing that we're seeing repeatedly from the women and the non-binary people with type 1 is that erratic glucose levels and the inefficiency of any commercial algorithms and the impact of menopause hormone therapies as a potentially stabilizing factor. But I can't say too much about that because there's papers which are currently going to press at this point in time. So it'll keep watching. There is information coming, and I'm hoping that in the next year we're going to have some answers to some of the questions that are out there. But as you've already said, Katerina, there is less than 2% of the global health budget spent on women's health, and that's from cradle to grave. Diabetes in itself is quite a small aspect of that health. So the fact that we've got some stuff in the past 6 years, I think, is phenomenal, and it's great to see that this is now gathering momentum of its own.
Thanks, and fingers crossed for a smooth peer review of whatever is coming up. We have someone in the chat stating that at 42, gynecologist says it's too early for perimenopause. Julia, maybe you can share from your view as an endocrinologist, is menopause like an off switch or more like a period of transition?
Yeah, I think you're correctly right. And also, as several people here in the chat, and I tried to read through the chat messages now, comment that their gynecologists obviously do have a very strict on and off definition of menopause, but in fact, I think it's more of a transition phase that might take longer in some people, might be a shorter period of time in other women. And so that makes also the research quite challenging, because you can't always define what's the starting point, what's the end, maybe the end point, yes, at some point in time. But yeah, so that's a huge challenge. And so I'm happy that a lot of people, including also here Jaime, who was telling that they are going to present data, hopefully at ADA, about their research, because it's really even more understudied than the menstrual cycle, simply because of the more complex definition of it. And people are sometimes also shy to talk about it and shy to ask about it. So even in our outpatient clinic, I don't think we focus enough on female health in that sense. So we are talking a lot of blood glucose, and maybe in some of the men we talk about their erectile dysfunction problems, but we rarely really discuss the status that women are currently in, if they are in the perimenopausal phase, or if they are struggling throughout the menstrual cycle, if the persons themselves do not bring up that topic. So I think that could be also integrated more into our routine questions and stressed more. And I think it's completely missing in med school that we are discussing those effects. So I think it's still like a black box for many of us. So really stressing that matter and highlighting it, it's an important opportunity to improve care. And interestingly, I was just tasked by one of our co-workers in Morocco to come up again with a joint symposium suggestion, and they suggested the topic of female health in diabetes care. So I'm quite happy that actually today I received that task. So and that it's a topic that's seen on the global scale.
That's fantastic. And to touch on gaps in research, I think we often equate equality with sameness, but equal treatments can sometimes produce unequal outcomes for people. And we know that most digital tools still treat users as biologically identical, although we know that they are not. And only 35% of diabetes technology trials report sex disaggregated outcomes. And also, when you look up women's health studies on PubMed, a lot of them focus on pregnancy only. And I think ignoring these factors in device development and algorithm development introduces bias, like heavy bias, and we lose opportunities for personalization here. And at the end of the day, personalized medicine is not truly personal if half of the population's data are treated as noise. And I hope, as a new professor in the field, I can help changing that and develop algorithms that are more context aware and understand the influence of different hormones, sleep, stress, other biomarkers. And regarding that, we're soon hiring. So if you are a computer scientist or a data engineer and are looking for a full-time paid position, focus on equitable open source AID, then please reach out. This could be your PhD or your postdoc project, or you could also join in a different role. We would be happy to hear from you. And my next question about that would be, we know that people already track cycles and symptoms on different kinds of apps or different methods. What do you both think would be meaningful integration of data, of hormonal data into AID systems? What should that look like? And are there any specific devices or sensors that you think of that could help?
So, I mean, what people or some people currently use, and I think one of the challenges, of course, is the reporting bias, the menstruational calendars. So there are kind of apps that you can use that you can also link with, for example, other health apps. But of course, it's not automatically connecting to other devices, and data sharing and data privacy might be issues that come around. In terms of sensors, I think glucose is the one that already helps us a bit to track and understand what's going to happen, but that's maybe then too late if that's basically reactive management rather than a proactive management. But for example, if we have algorithms that learn from the different phases that a woman is tracking, their cycle, and then for the next cycles, the algorithm can be tailored to really adjust to the individual needs, because there might be more like individualization rather than saying all women even are the same throughout their cycle. But for specific gadgets, currently, I think I don't have anything specific in mind. Is there anything, Dawn, that you would think of at the moment?
Some of us had a conversation with one of the European insulin pump manufacturers back at ATTD in Hamburg in 2023, and they have access to over 10,000, I believe, female users, and they were also able to have that population track hormone cycles in particular. So I work as a midwife, and we talk a lot about, the last day of menstrual period, first day of last menstrual period is your marker for pregnancy and that. So we had left a number of discussions with them, but one of the things we had been looking at was having literally a single button on an app that you could push at the first day of menstrual bleeding. And that would cover, I see someone's asked a question there about puberty. So again, that would work for puberty to say when your menstrual cycle starts and to press that button on the day that a menstrual cycle ends. And if you had a machine learning algorithm in the background that was able to do an analysis of the increase in insulin requirements, that should help to tailor the algorithms which are out there to deliver an appropriate level of insulin, because as any of us have used insulin pumps or MDI and finger pricks back in the day are very much aware, that week of the luteal phase in particular, your insulin is like water. And that's something which you hear repeatedly from those who ovulate. It's like water. I've had to double my insulin doses. I've cut back on my carbs, and I'm still sitting in the teens here in Europe, or higher than 180 in other countries. And it's a real frustration. And then the week after, once you start to menstruate, and for the week after, when you're at the back in that follicular phase, suddenly your insulin's like rocket fuel. It works, and you cannot keep up in terms of the carbs. You've reduced your insulin doses, and you're suddenly back in a place where you don't know when the next hypo's coming, how long it's going to last for. And it was simply the thought of adding in a single button that you could press, and you would remember to press it. When you start to menstruate, you know that you've started to menstruate. It's not a theoretical question, it's a reality. And whenever you no longer need to use menstrual protection of any sort. So again, if you had something like that, it does require additional input from the user, but that additional input from you would be offset by the fact that over a period of time, you would have something that you could look back over, and it would also track your hormone cycles for you. So if you did happen to become pregnant, if you did happen to be entering perimenopause, where you were having that extended duration of time from one cycle to the next, you would be able to see that physically and take that back to your endocrine team to explain why you were having the insulin variability and the requirement variability and the glucose variability that you aren't currently able to explain effectively or efficiently.
So we collected a lot of ideas here on self-report, maybe some gadgets, maybe machine learning could help. And there's a related question on the chat. Someone asks if there are any existing model that open source developers could use right now to implement in the code. Are you aware of that, or is that research that still needs to happen?
So as far as I know, that's research that needs to happen for the moment. I'm not aware of any of the systems really integrating it. What just came to my mind, because someone was saying geolocation, I think also travel would be an important factor. So like not only adjusting for the time zones, but your body might still be in your old time zone in terms of how it reacts to insulin over time. Even let's say in Vancouver, it's now already sometime still in the afternoon, and here in Europe we are in the late evening. So that might be a bit of a challenge for the body as well. Not only the hormones and the cycle, but also the day and night time and waking up and wake up hormones. So if another topic on the wish list could be implemented into new algorithms, that's probably time zone travel, adjusting better for it, not only with the function of the time, but potentially with the influence of the time that the person was in before on the insulin requirements.
Talking about circadian rhythms, there is another question on chat about puberty and diabetes research. And the paper that comes to mind is about different basal rate variants according to children's age. It's quite old. It's a paper from Germany because we love having 24 basal rates in our systems. And that is the only paper, honestly, that I think addresses child physiology and growth and puberty in terms of insulin needs. But please, everyone, fill in the blanks if you know of anything. Pop it in the chat to help this mother of an 11-year-old girl, which is in the midst of puberty. So I feel you as a mom. That's still ahead with my daughter years, but yeah, as a pediatrician, I know what you're going through. There is also a question about hormonal IUD and if that has any effects on menstrual cycle effects. Maybe Julia, you mentioned that you're working on contraception and insulin resistance. Did that cover IUD as well?
No, so that was real oral anti-contraceptives, and that was interestingly a study that was not easy in recruiting. So we could easily recruit a control group without oral anti-contraceptives, because obviously, especially in the younger population, those methods seem to have become quite unpopular. So maybe in the future we will need to think a bit more about kind of how the actual cycle is affecting glucose control rather than how anti-contraceptives are affecting it. So I guess that seems to be not an as relevant medication or intervention as in the past. So, but for IUDs, we did not look into it. I assume it depends what type of IUD it is, if it affects the hormones or if it does not affect the hormones. But normally one would suspect that the effect is more locally rather than in the central system, so probably less of an effect by the device compared to the oral anti-contraceptives that were used in our trial.
And there's another question on hormone replacement therapies. Is there any evidence on that? And maybe Dawn, you can share from the lived experience.
So from the lived experience, the hormone replacement therapies initially start out in exactly the same way as oral contraceptives do, where it's a cyclical pattern. So you take it for a set period of time and then you stop taking it. So you have your breakthrough bleed as such. now using the continual menopause hormone therapies, so using a progesterone pessary and using an estrogen patch, it's a consistent level of hormone over the course of that period of time. It's not like there are monthly differences. There's no change from one week to the next. But I personally have noticed that my glucose variability has significantly reduced with that. And just thinking back to what Julia was saying as well about the oral contraceptive therapies, it would be so interesting to see if, for example, things like the Depo-Provera injection for hormone, which is a sustained release, or the Implanon, which goes in exactly the same way as the glucose sensor, which is worn underneath your skin, stays in situ for a period of up to 3 years, I think that one is. It would be really interesting to see what the difference was in glucose variability, because that isn't a cyclical hormonal administration system. But I don't know what the uptake is within the type 1 or the type 2 on insulin community. So that it's probably a high hope. And I don't know what the regulations are for that in other countries outside of the UK, to be honest with you. But certainly, as I say, speaking to my peer community within the Menopause Mothers WhatsApp group, it seems to be that continual hormone administration does reduce the height of peaks and reduce the depths of the troughs. And we're seeing an increased improvement in time and range as well, and time and tight range for folk who are able to access those therapies.
And what about gender-affirming care? We've heard from anecdotes that people share their experience like a second puberty all over again. Is that something that echoes your experience, both as a clinician and as a peer in the community?
Absolutely, yeah. It is. It's that level of chaos that you just cannot actually account for. And I see that there are different conversations going on in the chat there about the beginning of perimenopause. And we know that it is the evil younger sister of menopause. Menopause is simply one day. It's when you haven't had a period for a year, and everything after that point in time is post-menopause. That perimenopause period is so chaotic and can last. I saw someone earlier today, I was at a diabetes dietitian event earlier on today, and they were saying, oh yeah, it's 4 years for perimenopause. And I thought, yeah, if only. That would be so easy. If it was only 4 years, that would be an absolute walk in the park. But what we seem to be finding from people who are going through perimenopause as a natural life stage seems to be anything up to 14 years. And there's so much of a gap in that research in itself. But you cannot have that pre-puberty phase for up to 14 years. That simply doesn't happen, because so many who are born with ovaries and uteruses have had their first menstrual period by the time they're 12 years of age. And we know that those sex hormones don't kick in until slightly further down the line. And there's more obvious signs and symptoms that that's happening than there is with the perimenopause phase, which really just looks like crazy woman at work who's losing her temper with everybody, who's not sleeping at night. And it's put down very often to other life circumstances that are going on, whether it be relationships, whether it be being overlooked in the workplace, be it, being that sandwich generation where you're caring for small children and looking after older family members as well. So I because we don't have a definite for when that starts. Yeah, it's like puberty, but it just goes for so much longer.
And in the chat, we also have a conversation about thyroid hormones. So what do they add to the mix?
Dawn, I think that's a bit more of the research that you have done as well in the past, right? So, I mean, I'm only the one controlling the thyroid hormones, but in a sense that we would adjust the doses. But I personally have not yet looked into any daily variations across the life, the half-life of thyroid hormones. What we observed in our clinic was that people who had a hypothyroidism, that they had worse glycemic control because obviously the metabolism was slowed down, but that's the only effect that I have personally experienced in our clinics.
Yeah, and there does seem to be a correlation of sorts between Hashimoto's and menstrual irregularities, or Hashimoto's and increased insulin requirements compared to, for example, Graves' disease, which is at that hyper spectrum, end of the spectrum. So yeah, again, from the lived experience and from the discussions that I've been hearing increasingly within healthcare professional circles, it is another area which we need to have additional investigation into. And given the fact that so many people with type 1 in particular are at have a higher incidence of hyperactive thyroid, hypoactive thyroid, and Crohn's disease, which again, that transition of food through the gut will also all be impacting in that as well.
And where do you think AID algorithms already account for a lot of the changes in insulin sensitivity, and when is their potential ending? Like, where do we need to do more research to make them better? At what point?
I think probably just take all of us, put us into a room and do those glucose clamps. But to be fair, that would get in the way of my normal day-to-day life activities, so it's not something I'm prepared to sign up for at this point in time or at any stage in my life. But I know that that would ultimately give maybe a more comprehensive overview of what's actually going on at a base physiological level.
But I also think that what a lot of you guys have done on both ends, both on the sending end and on the receiving end, is already quite helpful. So people with diabetes who donate their data, who hopefully are not scared to provide us with more information. So not only glucose, but potentially start and end of menstrual cycle, exercise data, and so on. Those data are so relevant for us that we can have a look, and of course also to all the programmers and statisticians and epidemiologists who then can have a look and get better information and adjust the therapy better, adjust the algorithms better. I think all of that is so helpful for all of us.
And if you had unlimited resources for research, what would be the clinical trial design you would come up with? Where do you think we have the biggest gap in data, and what would you do?
I mean, currently, I believe that's what we should look at is not only clinical trials, but really real-world data, because we still observe a huge difference between what we see in clinical trials versus real world. So real world gives us kind of a broader sense of understanding what's actually happening to that person. So for example, if a person of woman actually is in a certain phase of the menstrual cycle and is exercising, that might be completely different from a male individual who is not affected by hormones. So I think tracking 24/7 data from the individuals and feeding them back in good data quality is really so essential for us, and could give us really huge benefits. Otherwise, of course, all the short-term trials that all of us are doing add to the puzzle, but we need more or less a lot of those little puzzle parts and pieces to really make the whole picture visible.
Yeah, I'm saying that Abbott are one of the sponsors of this event. Maybe they could make a glucose sensor that now not only tracks ketones, which I believe is their next project, but also tracks T3, T4, estrogen, progesterone, luteinizing hormone, beta HCG levels. Maybe if you're going to do it right, so that we can just go about our normal daily life without having to go and be involved actively in studies. Yeah, fine, make that sensor, I'll wear it, I'm more than happy to do that, and you can feed back to me what exactly is going on in my life, because I have no idea.
We see a lot of thumbs up in the chat, and someone stating it's not 42 factors that influence blood glucose, it's more like 9,000. I think we all agree. There is a comment in the chat that Diabeloop have produced a lot of data about ISF variability according to glucose levels as a baseline using users' data. And the person assumes they are who Dawn spoke to at ATTD in Hamburg. Is that correct?
Probably.
Okay.
Let's look at the chat. Do we have any more questions? Oh, how much would you pay for that sensor that tracks everything?
About £3.50. I think that's all it's worth.
If industry partners are watching, hello Abbott, what's one easy design change they could make to their devices other than tracking every hormone under the sun that they could start working on tomorrow?
Yeah, potentially integrating with other platforms so that it reads right across and that it's properly intraoperable and interoperable.
So actually, they work less on their individual platforms and rather make it easier to access the data from different platforms, because for us it's such a pain, and whenever you are in an ad board with whoever the company is, they're always so happy to show you, oh yeah, and we made a new design for a new platform, and that's the amazing and best platform, blah blah blah. And in fact, for us, it's like, oh my goodness, no, it's another platform, it's another login. We need to get the permission from the hospital. We need to know how to deal with the passwords and the usernames. So for me, it would be really the best option if the hospital and, of course, the person living with diabetes can choose the platform that they are using for their sensor data, and not making the sensor manufacturers pushing them into one or another direction, because that's sometimes really a pain. And if we will observe more sensors on the market, with all of them coming along with different platforms, maybe that will become in the future a showstopper, and certain clinics would say, okay, we accept sensors A, B, C, but we will not prescribe D, E, F. So I think if they are more interoperable and open, that's going to be a win-win on both ends.
Dawn, would you feel comfortable with an endocrinologist tracking your menstrual cycle data as well?
I think having spent enough times in the room with my male endocrinologist saying, if you brought me a week earlier to have a look at my HbA1c and what my glucose levels were like, we'd have been flying here. You wouldn't be asking me all these really difficult questions. Heck yes, absolutely. It wouldn't have been an issue at all. But trying to convince my male endocrinologist that actually my periods are seriously impacting my glucose levels and my insulin intake, and having to argue my own case. And it was, I know that n=1 doesn't really count for very much, but when you are that one and you're having those conversations, yeah, just being able to hand them over a data set and say, see, I told you, would be such a win.
And we see a lot of conversations in the community about data security and menstrual data. We saw news with data leaks from period apps. What are your thoughts around that? And would there be any way for the open source community to find a way that does not involve period trackers?
I think it's more protected when it's within the open source community, isn't it? You know, it's not that they're going to sell your data on to anyone else, and it's less likely to end up in questionable hands. And you also have a higher level of control over what you share with family, friends, loved ones. Whereas when you're paying for an app or downloading the free version of an app, you have no idea where that information's going to. And just thinking back to what you were asking about, you know, pregnant or period data, the fact that whenever you go in during a pregnancy and your glucose data is there on your endocrinologist's screen, it's there on your obstetrician's screen. If your baby goes to a neonatal unit, they can access to that data as well. Well, you know, yeah, you have to have periods to be able to have a baby. So I don't see that that's a bigger conversation to be having. I think it's like all part and parcel of the same conversation, but the data should be respected by anybody who is looking at it and accepted for what it is, which is basically very normal data.
Julia, do you have any thoughts on how we could make data sharing more safe?
Yeah, so I think that's still one of the biggest challenges that we potentially have. So if it is a safe platform and on a trustworthy platform, I think it is probably more acceptable for people living with diabetes to share additional information. On the other hand, if it's just like one system catching all the data, maybe they might be afraid that if there is a breach into that system, all of the data are taken by whoever has access to them. On the other hand side, I think so many apps are around and we are not really aware who is the manufacturer, where the data are located and so on. So I think there should be some criteria in the respective app stores and within the gadgets that tell us about the safety standards that are used. That should be maybe a first mitigation step. And I think that will be also one of the challenges that you will see in your new role, I guess, and where you will probably also give us advice in the future how to deal with that.
I will certainly try. In the chat, we already see folks getting excited about Vancouver. So my closing question would be to both of you, if you have one feature request for people at the hackathon, what would it be in terms of hormonal awareness?
I think now I'm copying Dawn's request about that simple tracking button for periods. And if I may have two, then it would be periods and illness.
Yeah. That, and if you needed additional medication, so if you were, example, to have been found to have Hashimoto's or Graves' disease, that you can then factor that in as well with the dose that you're taking to see what the impact is, so that you have a more comprehensive result set and a more comprehensive data set about what is going on in your own life. Because the systems already do allow for you to press a button whenever you're about to exercise or pre-exercise. But just to have those other things going on would be amazing.
And what message would you like every person with diabetes to take away from this discussion?
Dawn, do you want to start here? Because like I took the liberty of starting with the first one. So
I think it would be, you know, at the end of the day, there's just under 50% of the population who live with type 1 diabetes. And it would be amazing to have something which actually met our needs as well. That would be phenomenal.
And I think my comment would be again that we are so happy to collaborate with our people living with diabetes, and grateful for really the donation or making available their data and participating in our trials, and being trustful that we try our best to come to a good joint outcome. And I think we are here all in the same boat and need to work together.
Thank you both for
Thank
this
you
rich
all.
conversation.
This was
And
fantastic.
Amy's already here as a
I
timekeeper.
popped up to just, I want to ask you, Katarina, that last question. What would you want people to take away from this discussion, or what would you like to see happen at the hackathon in relation to what was just discussed?
Well, I'm so excited that this is one of the key topics. So my request would be to the community to really be creative. I think we've heard a lot of great things from both of our experts today. We heard about research gaps, but we also heard ideas for quick fixes. So if any of that sparks your interest and you already have an idea in mind, or you have a rough idea and that shapes into something more tangible during the event, that would be my request. And another request would be to somehow make that more accessible for people who cannot be at the event. And just keep discussing what you do next week.
Thank you. Okay, on that note, I should say we are recording these sessions so people can view them who are not able to attend today or won't be able to attend next week. And we're also going to be trying to capture the chat because there's some really fire conversations going on in there. So thank everyone for that. And thank you to all three of you. This is a great session. And we will coming back to this topic, of course, during our interactive discussions later in the program.